On the night of her 18th birthday, Omega Elara waits to be recognized by her destined mate, Alpha Heir Marcus. But during the Lunar Binding ritual, he denounces her before their entire Moonridge Pack. He calls her worthless and beneath him, destroying their connection while choosing her manipulative older sister, Cassandra, instead. Devastated beyond measure, Elara's entire world shatters. Yet her suffering doesn't go unnoticed. A silent, powerful figure has been observing from the shadows. The ancient Lycan King Darius is in attendance, and he's outraged by the insult to the moon goddess. More than that, he's captivated by the scent of the discarded Omega. The night air in the sacred grove pulsed with energy that felt almost alive. Pine and earth mingled with the sharp metallic scent of wolves on the verge of transformation. Elara, an Omega of the Moonridge Pack, positioned herself toward the rear of the gathering, exactly where someone of her rank belonged. Her palms were slick with nervous sweat as she fidgeted with the coarse fabric of her plain cotton dress. This was the Lunar Binding. This was her 18th birthday. This was supposed to be the night everything changed. She fought to steady her thundering heartbeat, but it crashed against her chest like waves against rocks. The bond had been there for years, a whisper beneath her consciousness, an invisible cord tying her to him. Marcus, heir to the Alpha title. Their fated connection was the pack's most poorly guarded secret, something that sparked whispered jealousy and gave Elara her only thread of hope. Being an Omega meant existing at the bottom of every hierarchy, enduring every slight, accepting every indignity. But this bond made it all survivable. Her eyes wandered toward the front where her older sister Cassandra held court among the pack's elite. Cassandra was stunning, her chestnut hair catching moonlight like silk, her laugh carrying confidence and charm as she entertained high-ranking warriors. She'd spent their entire lives casting Elara into shadow, claiming every accolade, every bit of their parents' affection. Elara felt that familiar hollow ache of never measuring up, but she forced it aside. Tonight status meant nothing. Popularity meant nothing. Only the moon goddess and her divine plan mattered. The pack alpha, Marcus's father, lifted his arms high. Silence crashed over the hundreds of assembled wolves. Tonight, his voice thundered across the clearing. We pay tribute to the moon goddess. We honor the sacred bond she bestows. We forge the destiny of the Moonridge Pack. A unified howl erupted from the crowd, and Elara trembled as the sound vibrated through her bones. The moon ascended higher, a flawless luminous sphere casting everything in silver and shadow. Elara's breathing quickened. She felt it intensely now, the magnetic draw. The bond blazed brighter, transforming into something tangible in her core, pulling her forward with undeniable force. He was near. Marcus sensed it too. He strode into the circle's center. Marcus embodied everything an alpha should be. Imposing height, powerful build, carrying an authority that commanded immediate submission. He was the man who haunted her dreams, the one who would finally acknowledge her worth, the one who would transform her from nobody into Luna. Marcus's gaze swept across the assembled wolves. Elara's heart seized in her chest. See me, she begged silently. Her hands clenched until her nails left crescents in her skin. Please just see me. His scan moved past the prominent families, over those who fawned and competed for his attention, until it locked directly onto her. He stared, his features impossible to read, his eyes dark as midnight beneath the moon's glow. The clearing seemed to contract until only the two of them existed. The pull in her stomach intensified into an absolute command. Then his voice, amplified by the dominance of alpha bloodline, sliced through the darkness. Elara. He had spoken her name aloud. He had called for her. Relief and joy crashed over her in dizzying waves. The whispers rippling around her confirmed the reality. This was happening. This was real. Come forward, Marcus commanded. Her trembling legs obeyed. She navigated past the other Omegas, holding her head high for the first time she could remember. She walked toward everything she'd ever wanted, her fated mate, her future. She focused so intently on his face that she nearly overlooked the expression in his eyes. It wasn't the warmth of destined love. It was frigid, cutting, filled with a disdain she'd never witnessed before. But momentum carried her forward, commitment already made. Every pack member's attention locked on her as she entered the circle's heart. Elara stood motionless in the circle's center, feeling like a sacrifice laid before an unforgiving deity. The quiet was total. Even the nocturnal creatures had gone still. She could sense countless eyes boring into her. Yet the only gaze that mattered belonged to Marcus. They were as unforgiving and impenetrable as obsidian. The affection she'd imagined seeing for years had been a phantom, a comforting lie she'd told herself. This was truth. This was the real Marcus. Marcus, she breathed, the word barely escaping into the suffocating air. Their bond screamed mate, mate, mate while every instinct howled danger. He offered no response. He simply observed her, his face sculpted into bored calculation. From her peripheral vision, Elara registered the honored guests on the elevated granite dais. The Pack Alpha sat beside an unoccupied chair reserved for other visiting dignitaries. Rumor claimed a representative of the Lycan King himself attended tonight, standard protocol for ceremonies of prominent packs. Elara's humiliation wouldn't be private. It carried political weight. Marcus allowed the silence to extend, wringing every ounce of control from the moment. He let her shake, let the pack's murmurs begin to swell. An Omega, someone hissed nearby. This can't be serious, another muttered. Marcus raised one hand and the whispers evaporated instantly. He looked at her but addressed the entire pack. His voice polished confidence. We assemble beneath the goddess's watchful eye to secure our pack's future. A future demanding strength. A future requiring purity. A future that cannot rest on fate's error. Error. The word struck Elara like a fist to the gut. The happiness and relief that had propelled her to this spot soured into cold, nauseating terror. For years, Marcus continued, circling her slowly like a predator. We have operated under certain assumptions about the goddess's intentions. He stopped directly before her, close enough that she caught the sharp scent of cedar and frost on his skin. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper meant only for her ears, though every wolf watched intently. Did you honestly believe, he sneered, that you could become Luna? Did you genuinely think I would chain myself to inadequacy? Her breath caught. The hope that had sustained her for 18 years began fracturing. She glanced toward his father, the Alpha, but he watched his son with a carefully neutral expression, making no attempt to stop this. Marcus straightened, his features hardening as he turned back to the crowd. He drew a deep, theatrical breath, chest swelling with the dominance inherited through his bloodline. The moon reached its absolute peak, white light cascading down like a divine spotlight. He appeared every inch the perfect future Alpha. And he was about to deliver his verdict. His eyes met hers one final time. Empty of warmth, history, or compassion. Our future demands power, he proclaimed, his voice ringing with absolute finality. He extended one condemning finger directly at her. I, Marcus, future Alpha of the Moonridge Pack, he bellowed, his voice supercharged with supernatural power that sent chills racing down every spine. Do hereby publicly reject you, Elara, as my fated mate. The declaration hit Elara with devastating force. This wasn't merely emotional trauma. This was spiritual annihilation. Blinding, searing agony exploded in her chest as the silver thread of their fated bond wasn't cut cleanly but viciously torn apart. It felt like her very essence was being ripped in two. She gasped, a strangled inhuman sound escaping her throat, stumbling backward as she clutched her chest. The torture drove her to her knees. The pack gasped collectively. This transcended a simple severing. This was the public execution of something sacred. Marcus watched her crumple with profound revulsion. The moon goddess made a mistake, he declared with staggering arrogance. He gestured toward her. A trembling, weeping figure collapsed on the ground. Our pack cannot be guided by weakness. We cannot be symbolized by this. He practically spat the word, the sound reverberating in the shocked silence. She is weak. She is inadequate. And she is nothing but an Omega. The final word emerged like a curse. The pain in her chest flared white-hot and blinding. She couldn't draw breath. The world tilted sickeningly, silver moonlight turning gray and distorted. She could hear the whispers starting, shock transforming into murmurs of agreement. He was their Alpha heir. His word was law. If he declared her weak, then weak she must be. If he claimed the goddess erred, he must be correct. Her entire world had imploded. The one person destined to be her everything, her guardian, her completion, was the one inflicting this devastation. She looked up desperately through a veil of tears. She searched Marcus's father's face, finding only stone. She scanned the pack members she'd known her entire life, who now averted their gazes, expressions mixing pity and scorn. She was utterly alone. She was nothing. Marcus absorbed the sight of her, broken and kneeling before him, a small satisfied smirk playing across his lips. He'd accomplished his goal. He'd freed himself from his fated obligation. But the ceremony wasn't complete. The pack still required a Luna. My pack, Marcus announced, his voice smooth and confident once more, deserves a genuine Luna. A powerful Luna. One I have personally selected. The pain still drowned her in waves. But through it, Elara processed his words. Her vision swam. Selected. He was turning away from her. He was scanning the assembled wolves. His eyes settled on someone in the front ranks among the elite warriors. A triumphant smile transformed his features. Elara on her hands and knees followed his gaze. He was moving with clear purpose. He was approaching the one person she'd always trusted, always loved. He was walking directly toward her sister. Elara's mind, foggy and buzzing with the agony of her shattered bond, struggled to comprehend the scene unfolding before her. Marcus wasn't just approaching Cassandra. He was claiming her. Cassandra, her beautiful, popular, flawless older sister, stepped forward from the crowd. Her face showed no surprise whatsoever. No sisterly concern for Elara, who remained bleeding her soul onto the cold earth. Instead, a slow, triumphant smile spread across Cassandra's features. This was pure, calculated victory. This wasn't unexpected. This was a coronation. Marcus reached her and without hesitation seized Cassandra by the waist. He pulled her into a deep, passionate, possessive kiss. Right in front of Elara. Right before the entire pack. It was brutal public declaration, a branding. The pack's stunned silence morphed into confused murmuring. This was betrayal beyond comprehension. Marcus broke the kiss but kept Cassandra molded against his side. He raised her hand high, his eyes blazing with pride. This is your future Luna, he roared. Cassandra, my chosen mate. For a heartbeat, the pack hesitated. Rejecting a fated mate was a grave insult to the goddess, but defying a future alpha meant pack suicide. Slowly, scattered applause began, then more joined. Within moments, the clearing filled with ragged, uncertain but growing cheers. They were choosing their alpha. They were choosing power over destiny. They were choosing Cassandra over Elara. The sound of their applause struck like a second assault. Elara, forgotten on the ground, felt her last reserves of strength abandon her. She looked up, her vision tunneling, her breath coming in shallow, agonizing gasps. Through the haze of tears she saw her sister. Cassandra was looking directly at her over Marcus's shoulder, as he nuzzled her neck and accepted the pack's jubilation. Cassandra's eyes found hers. She didn't look away. She held her sister's broken gaze and smirked. It was a small, vicious, knowing expression that communicated clearly, "You never stood a chance. He was always mine." The double betrayal, her mate and her sister, was the final killing blow. The agony in her chest, the public degradation, the crushing weight of that single triumphant smirk exceeded what her spirit could endure. The world darkened at the edges. Her body, no longer capable of supporting even her grief, surrendered. Elara collapsed unconscious onto the damp earth. The final sound penetrating her fading consciousness was the pack celebrating Marcus and Cassandra. But as awareness slipped away, a new sound cut through the festivities. It wasn't celebration. It was a low, resonant growl that vibrated through her very bones. It was the sound of ancient, cold, absolute fury. The celebration for the new alpha pair died immediately, frozen in the pack's collective throat. The atmosphere, which moments before had been filled with cheers, suddenly became oppressive, frigid, and electric with dread. That growl hadn't originated from any Moonridge wolf. It was too profound, too ancient, too saturated with power that strangled the breath from their lungs. Marcus's father, Alpha Thorn, had been rising to congratulate his son, a politically necessary if uncomfortable smile on his face. He froze. "My son has made his selection," he began, but his voice faltered as the growl echoed again, seeming to emanate from everywhere simultaneously. The pressure in the clearing plummeted. The silver moonlight appeared to dim as though an enormous shadow had passed across the moon. A terrifying ancient power rolled over the assembly like a physical force, pressing down on every wolf. This was pure, undiluted dominance. Omegas and Betas were forced to their knees. Warriors and even Marcus himself bowed their heads, their wolves whimpering in submission. Alpha Thorn was compelled to kneel, a profound act of submission on his own territory. This wasn't pack authority. This was primal law. Every eye wide with terror turned toward the raised granite platform reserved for honored guests. A figure was emerging from the deep shadows, stepping into the waning moonlight. He had been a silent observer, a formality. He was intervening now. It was King Darius, the legendary merciless Lycan King, ruler of all packs, alpha of alphas, last of the ancient bloodline. He was a myth of terror told to misbehaving children, and he was here. He stood tall, dressed in dark, severe leathers that made no sound, moving with fluid grace that was more apex predator than man. His power radiated from him in visible, suffocating waves, but his eyes held the pack captive. They weren't the blue, brown, or even amber of normal werewolves. They blazed with unnatural molten gold light. And they weren't fixed on Marcus, the new alpha. They weren't fixed on Cassandra, the new Luna. They weren't fixed on Alpha Thorn. His gaze, burning with terrifying cold fury, was locked on the small, broken form of the rejected Omega lying unconscious in the dirt. The king was enraged. The pack could smell it. This wasn't the hot, impulsive anger of a pack dispute. This was the cold, patient, absolute wrath of an ancient force. It smelled like ozone, blood, and approaching storm. He took one slow, deliberate step off the platform onto the sacred ground. His heavy boot made no sound on the stones. He began walking, his eyes never leaving Elara. The king was moving. King Darius stood over her, a mountain of shadow and power. The pack was so silent he could hear the frantic pounding of their hearts. They were terrified, as they should be. He had come to the Moonridge Pack to observe. Their alpha, Thorn, had been petitioning him for expanded territory, and Darius had come to assess his worthiness, to witness how he governed his pack, how he honored the ancient ways. And this was what he discovered. A spectacle. A sacrilege. His golden eyes were fixed on Elara. He could smell the spiritual corruption of her broken bond. A scent like ozone and ash, the perfume of profound agony that offended his ancient sensibilities. This was a direct, public, arrogant insult to the moon goddess. A fated bond was her most sacred gift. To reject it was blasphemy. To do it with such theatrical cruelty was a declaration of hubris his authority could not tolerate. Marcus, his foolish bravado evaporating, finally found his voice. "Your Majesty," he stammered, his alpha tone cracking under the pressure of the king's dominance. "This is merely a pact matter. She is unsuitable. She is only an Omega." The king's head snapped toward him. He didn't advance. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Marcus. The air temperature in the clearing dropped dramatically. Marcus choked on his next word, the air freezing in his lungs. The king's aura flared, a suffocating blanket of pure dominance that forced Marcus to his knees. Only an Omega. The words echoed in the king's ancient mind. He had ruled for centuries. He had witnessed alphas rise and fall. He recognized power when he encountered it, and he recognized arrogance. But as he looked back at the girl, he detected something else beneath the agony. It was faint, buried deep but unmistakable. A scent of winter pine, ancient stone, and dormant fiery magic. It was a scent that had no business emanating from a weak Omega. It was a scent that called to him. His rage, which had been cold and calculated, now gained a new personal edge. These fools hadn't just insulted the goddess. They had broken something precious. He ignored Marcus's pathetic wheezing gasps. He ignored Cassandra, who was cowering behind her new mate, her pretty face a mask of terror. He ignored Alpha Thorn trembling on his platform. His entire world narrowed to the girl on the ground. In a move that sent a shockwave through the pack, King Darius, the ruthless Lycan King, knelt in the dirt. He knelt before the rejected Omega. He reached out a single black-gloved hand, his movement slow and deliberate. His fingers, symbols of so much death and power, hovered over her tear-streaked face. He brushed a matted strand of hair from her cheek. She was cold, nearly lifeless. They did this to you, he whispered, so low only he could hear. He hooked his gloved hand beneath her chin, his touch firm. Look at me. The command wasn't a request. It was ancient law imbued with power that bypassed her broken consciousness and spoke directly to her soul. Elara's eyelids fluttered. She was trapped in a black, agonizing void where the pain of Marcus's rejection was the only reality. But this voice burned through the darkness like a new sun. She was compelled to obey. Her eyes, dull, glassy, swimming with unshed tears, opened. They were empty. She was a hollow shell. Her spirit already half departed. Her unfocused, broken gaze drifted upward and met his. The world ended. It wasn't a gentle hum or a silver thread of fate. It was a cataclysm, a supernova of destiny. The moment her broken blue eyes met his burning gold ones, a bond exploded into existence. It was golden, fiery, furious, a connection that slammed into them both with the force of a physical collision. Elara gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of breath as the bond, a king's bond, seized her very essence. It was power so vast it was terrifying. It surged from Darius into her. A tidal wave of ancient strength meeting a tiny dormant spark deep within her own soul, igniting it into an inferno. For Elara, the agonizing, tearing pain of Marcus's rejection was instantly and utterly incinerated. It vaporized as though it had never existed. In its place, this new golden power flooded her, mending the tear in her spirit, sealing the wound in her soul. It was warm, absolute, and possessive. For Darius, it was a shock that rocked him to his core. He who had lived for a millennium, who had long assumed his fated mate was dust, had found her here now, a broken child kneeling in the mud, rejected by a pathetic alpha whelp. The scent he detected, pine and stone and magic, was his. His rage, already mountainous, became volcanic. This wasn't just an insult to the goddess. This wasn't just the breaking of a pack Omega. This was a direct, personal, unforgivable assault on his queen. Elara's eyes, which had been empty, suddenly focused. She was no longer looking at a terrifying stranger. She was no longer looking at a king. She was looking at the other half of her own soul. The pain was gone. The confusion was gone. There was only him. Darius's face, which had been a mask of cold fury, twisted into something far more dangerous. He rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his golden eyes burning with new terrifying purpose. He had not just found an injustice. He had found his mate. The power radiating from the king and the Omega was tangible, a crackling golden aura that shimmered in the moonlight, pushing back against the cold. Elara was still on her knees, but she was no longer collapsed. Her spine straightened, her head lifted. Her eyes, now clear and sharp, locked on Darius. Marcus, who had managed to stand, stared in disbelief. The scent of his broken bond with Elara was gone, replaced by an overwhelming, possessive, ancient scent emanating from her, from the king. What? What did you do? Marcus stammered, his voice weak. He took an instinctive step forward. She was yours, Darius snarled. His head snapped to Marcus, and this time there was no cold calculation in his eyes. There was only the white-hot promise of death. She was yours to cherish, yours to protect, yours to honor. He took one slow step toward Marcus and Cassandra. They stumbled backward, tripping over each other. Cassandra, who had been smirking moments before, was now pale as the moon above, her eyes wide with terror that transcended pack politics. You, Darius hissed, his voice a low, deadly vibration. He pointed a single black-gloved finger at Marcus, mimicking the gesture of rejection Marcus had used on Elara. You have rejected your destiny. You have defiled a sacred bond. You have cast aside the one chosen for you by the moon goddess. He paused, a cruel, cold smile touching his lips. He let his gaze slide to Cassandra, who whimpered and tried to hide behind Marcus. You cast her aside. Darius's voice dripped with contempt for this. For ambition. For a worthless, hollow-hearted. He cut himself off, his fury too great for simple insults. He turned back to Marcus, his eyes blazing. And in your arrogance, he continued, his voice rising to a thunderous, dominant roar that shook the very trees, in your blindness, you have delivered her to me. The last words were a shockwave. Darius stalked back to Elara. He didn't offer his hand. He gripped her arm, his touch firm and possessive, and pulled her to her feet. He hauled her against his side, tucking her small frame against his, a clear, unmistakable gesture of ownership. She stumbled, her legs still weak, but he held her upright, his arm a band of steel around her waist. Marcus stared, his mind sluggishly comprehending the magnitude of his mistake. No, he whispered. You can't. She's an Omega. She's nothing. Darius actually laughed, a short, harsh, terrifying sound. He looked down at Elara, his golden eyes momentarily softening as he took in her shocked but steady gaze. He turned his head, looking directly at the horrified pack. Witness, he commanded. Witness what happens to a gift of the goddess when it is given to one who is worthy. No, Marcus screamed, a desperate broken sound. He lunged forward, his alpha instincts finally overriding his fear, driven by a sudden agonizing wave of jealousy he couldn't understand. She's mine. He didn't make it 2 steps. King Darius didn't even look at him. He simply flared his aura, and an invisible wall of power slammed into Marcus, throwing him backward as if struck by a falling tree. He crashed to the ground, skidding in the dirt, the air knocked from his lungs. Darius snarled, his eyes flashing, is everything. He turned his full attention back to Elara. She was trembling not from fear, but from the raw volcanic power of the king's bond singing in her veins. It was a roaring lion where Marcus's bond had been a dying bird. Darius lifted his free hand, his bare fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his gaze possessive. They will never hurt you again, he vowed. His voice a low promise more binding than any oath. She believed him. He tilted her head, exposing the pale, vulnerable skin of her neck, right where a faded mark should have been. She drew a sharp, sudden breath, her eyes locking with his. There was no question in his gaze, no hesitation. There was only certainty. This was not a choice. This was destiny. You are mine, he growled. He lowered his head. He didn't just nip. He didn't just mark. He claimed. His fangs, longer and sharper than any normal wolf's, extended. He sank his teeth deep into the claiming spot, branding her, binding her body and soul to him for eternity. The moment his fangs pierced her skin, the king's bond detonated. It was not pain. It was blinding, healing, ecstatic fire. The last spiritual shards of Marcus's broken bond were instantly incinerated. Elara screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated power. Her bones felt as if they were being reforged, her blood turning to liquid gold. The ancient strength of the Lycan lineage flooded her, not as a gift, but as an awakening. It unlocked power that had been dormant in her own bloodline for generations. A visible wave of golden energy erupted from her, a shock wave of pure magic that blasted outward, forcing the entire pack to shield their eyes. Darius lifted his head. His lips were stained with her blood. He licked the wound clean, his tongue sealing the mark, and it healed instantly, leaving behind a new intricate glowing golden mark, the mark of a queen. Elara's eyes, which had been filling with tears, flew open. The terrified pale blue of the Omega was gone. They were now a bright, sharp, startling shade of sapphire, ringed with the same unnatural burning gold as his. She was no longer Elara the rejected. She was Elara the claimed. The clearing was silent, save for Marcus's ragged, choked sobs. He was kneeling, staring at the golden mark on Elara's neck, his face a mask of profound, soul-shattering regret. His bond was truly gone, and the void it left was a black hole of agony he would never recover from. Elara stood tall, her hand resting on the king's chest. The world was new. Colors were sharper. Smells overwhelming. She could smell the sour, acidic fear coming from Cassandra. She could smell the acrid, sickening self-loathing pouring from Marcus. And beneath it all, she could smell him. Darius, her mate. He smelled of pine, of ozone, of ancient stone, an absolute unshakable power. The new golden energy hummed in her veins, a comforting heavy weight. King Darius kept her tucked against his side, his arm a possessive shield. He surveyed the stunned prostrate pack, his gaze glacial. The Moonridge Pack, he stated, his voice flat and void of emotion, is in disgrace. You have insulted your goddess. You have permitted the desecration of a sacred bond. You have wronged your queen. The word queen struck the pack like a physical blow. A new desperate wave of prostration rippled through the crowd. Alpha Thorn, his face pressed into the dirt, pleaded, Your Majesty, Queen Elara, forgive us. We didn't know. It was my son. It was Darius, agreed, his voice deadly. He looked at Marcus. A mistake he will have a lifetime to regret. Cassandra, her mind finally snapping, let out a hysterical laugh. No, it's a trick. I'm the Luna. He chose me. She's an Omega. She's nothing. Be silent, Elara said. Her voice was quiet. It was not a shout. It was not a plea, but it was laced with the new golden power of her bond, and it carried the authority of the king. Cassandra's hysterical shrieks cut off instantly as if her throat had been squeezed shut. The entire pack flinched. Elara, the Omega, had just commanded silence and received it. Darius looked down at her, a flicker of dark pride in his golden eyes. There is nothing for you here, he said, his voice softer, for her alone. Elara looked at the pack members who had scorned her. She looked at her sister, now weeping silent, furious tears. And she looked at Marcus, the man who had been her sun and stars, and felt nothing. Only cold, distant pity. He was pathetic. He was weak. The king was right. She turned her back on all of it. The clearing, her family, her entire life. She didn't feel a single pang of loss. Come, Darius commanded. He began walking toward the forest's edge, and Elara, the once weak Omega, walked with him, her steps steady, her head high. As they moved, silent black-clad Lycan warriors, the king's royal guard, materialized from the shadows, their golden eyes identical to his. They formed a silent, lethal perimeter around their king and his new queen. Elara took her first step out of the clearing, her hand still resting on her mate's arm, leaving her past to rot. She was heading to the Lycan King's court, a place of treacherous ancient power. She was terrified, but as she felt the steady possessive thrum of the king's bond, she was for the first time in her life not weak. The journey was a disorienting blur of motion. Elara was half carried, half led by Darius through a tear in reality, a shadow walk that bypassed the physical world. One moment she stood in the damp familiar forest of the Moonridge Pack. The next she stood on polished black marble so cold it seeped through the thin soles of her shoes. The Lycan King's court was not a fortress built on a mountain. It was a fortress carved from its very heart. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet overhead, lost in shadow, supported by massive unadorned pillars of black stone. Braziers burned with cold blue fire that cast long dancing shadows but provided little warmth. The air was dry and ancient, smelling of dust, ozone, and the overwhelming territorial scent of hundreds of powerful unfamiliar lichens. If the Moonridge clearing had been a stage, this was a pantheon. Her simple cotton dress, still stained with dirt and tears from the clearing, felt like beggar's rags. The lichens here wore dark, rich velvets, furs, and leathers. They were all tall, all beautiful, all terrifying, and every single one had stopped to stare at her. His Majesty has returned, a voice cried out. But it was unnecessary. Every Lycan in the vast hall had already dropped into a deep, respectful bow. Darius didn't slow, his arm still a possessive band of steel around her waist. He strode through the parting sea of powerful beings, his boots echoing with sharp authoritative clicks on the marble. Elara was towed in his wake, her heart hammering. This was a court of predators. She had been an Omega, the lowest of the low, for her entire life. Now she was surrounded by beings who were to an alpha what an alpha was to her. She felt their eyes on her, a physical weight of suspicion. She could hear their whispered sibilant thoughts, a low buzz in her mind she couldn't quite decipher, a new and unsettling ability. She saw their gazes drop to the glowing golden mark on her neck, then rise to her face with a mixture of shock, confusion, and undisguised contempt. They too smelled the Omega on her. They smelled the weakness of her former pack. A wolf, one woman hissed, her eyes like emerald chips of ice. She is marked, another breathed, his hand going to his chest in shock. They will learn, Darius growled. His voice a low rumble meant only for her. He didn't seem to care about their opinions. He didn't acknowledge a single one. He just kept walking, pulling her toward a massive throne carved from a single piece of obsidian. He finally stopped, turning to face the hall, pulling her in front of him, his back to the throne. He kept her tucked against his chest, his chin resting protectively over her head. He was presenting her. A high-ranking silver-haired male stepped forward, his face a mask of polite inquiry. Your Majesty, you were gone but a day. What is this? Who is this? The question hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. The entire court was waiting. Darius's grip on her waist tightened, and she felt the lethal possessive power thrumming just beneath his skin, ready to be unleashed. King Darius looked down at the silver-haired Lycan. Elara recognized him as Lord Kalan, the king's chief advisor, his face a web of aristocratic lines and cold intelligence. "This," Darius said, his voice flat and absolute, "is Elara, my mate, your queen." A collective sharp intake of breath hissed through the hall. Kalan's eyes widened, his gaze flicking from the king's implacable face to Elara's wide sapphire gold eyes. His gaze lingered on her cheap torn dress and the dirt on her cheek. "A queen," he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. "From where does she hail, my king?" She smells of her destiny," Darius cut him off, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill, "which I might add is now my destiny and yours. You will all show her the respect she is owed." He began to turn, intending to dismiss them, but a young arrogant Lycan from the back, his face flushed with indignation, pushed his way forward. "But Majesty, she is a wolf, a pack omega from the scent of it. She is unworthy." The word unworthy echoed in the vast hall, a clear-toned bell of defiance. It was the same word Marcus had used. A tremor of her past trauma, a cold, sickening fear shot through Elara. She instinctively flinched, her new power faltering. She had underestimated the king's speed. He moved so fast he was a black blur. He was no longer holding her. He was across the hall, his hand wrapped around the young Lycan's throat, lifting him clear off the marble floor. The sound of choking filled the silence. "My king," Kalan gasped, taking a step forward. Darius held up a hand, silencing him. He held the struggling Lycan at eye level, his golden eyes burning with calm, terrifying rage. "You," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft as the male clawed at his wrist, "have precisely 5 seconds to apologize to your queen. I suggest you use them wisely." "I can't breathe," the Lycan choked out. "That is the point," Darius said calmly. 4. "Please, Majesty." 3. 2. Elara saw the raw primal fear in the young Lycan's eyes and stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Darius, please." The king's head snapped toward her. He stared at her, his expression unreadable, the mail still dangling from his grip. He was not a gentle man. He was territorial. He was lethal. And his mate had just been insulted. But she was also his mate, and she had made a request. With a final contemptuous snarl, Darius threw the Lycan across the hall. He crashed into a stone pillar with a sickening crack and slumped to the floor, unconscious but breathing. Darius strode back to Elara in 2 steps, his rage still rolling off him in hot waves. He grabbed her hand, pulling it to his chest. "No one," he growled, his golden eyes boring into hers, "will ever disrespect you again. That is my vow. My protection is absolute. Do you understand?" She nodded, breathless. She understood. He was complex, dominant, and frightening. But in that moment, as the entire terrified court knelt before her, she felt something she had never felt before. She felt completely and utterly safe. The Moonridge Pack was broken. The sun rose on the sacred grove, but it brought no warmth. It illuminated a scene of profound disgrace. The pack members who had been forced to witness their future alpha's humiliation and their omega's cataclysmic rise were scattered, their faces gray with shock and fear. But for Marcus there was no sun. There was only the void. He sat on the cold ground where Elara had been claimed. The scent of her, that new terrifying scent of ozone and ancient power, was burned into his senses. But beneath it was the phantom smell of his bond, the one he had torn, the one he had rejected. It was a physical gnawing emptiness, a black hole in his chest where his soul was supposed to be. He had thought rejecting her would make him feel strong, free, in control. Instead he felt hollowed out, weak, and unutterably cold. He had cut off his own arm to prove he didn't need it, and now he was bleeding to death. "Marcus, Marcus, get up." Cassandra's voice was a shrill grating sound that scraped against his raw nerves. He looked up. She was standing over him, her beautiful face twisted into an ugly, petulant snarl. Her dress was ripped, her hair a mess. "You're just going to sit there?" she snapped. "They're gone." She left. That creature took her. "And you just let him?" "Let him?" Marcus croaked, his voice raw. He climbed to his feet, his body aching. He felt the emptiness inside him curdle into hot, sick irritation. He is the Lycan King, Cassandra. What would you have had me do? Challenge him? He insulted you, she shrieked. He insulted me. He called me hollow-hearted. And Elara, she looked at me. Cassandra couldn't articulate the look of cold pity Elara had given her. She's supposed to be nothing. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She's the Lycan Queen, Marcus whispered, the words tasting like ash. Goddess, what have I done? Stop saying that. Cassandra grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. Who cares? I am your chosen Luna. The pack must respect me. We will fix this. We will tell them she was enchanted. That the king was bewitched. Marcus ripped his arm from her grasp, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. The ambition he had found so attractive was now a grotesque, screeching thing. He had rejected his soul for this, for a shallow, grasping, envious woman who hadn't even bothered to check on him, only on her own newfound, now threatened status. The irritation turned to disgust. Leave me alone, Cassandra. Marcus, you are the future alpha. You will not walk away from me. He turned, the void in his chest a cold, dead weight. I was a fool, he said, not to her but to the empty air. I rejected my destiny. He began to walk away, his steps heavy, haunted. He was leaving her there, alone in the clearing. But it didn't matter. He was already alone. He would be alone for the rest of his miserable, fateless life. Days in the Lycan court bled together in a haze of terrifying new sensations. Elara was housed in the king's personal chambers, a cavernous suite of rooms where the walls themselves seemed to hum with ancient power. She was given new clothes, silks and velvets in dark regal colors that felt alien on her skin. But the greatest change was internal. The king's bond was a living, breathing thing inside her. It was a constant warm presence at the base of her spine, a hum of golden energy that connected her always to Darius. She felt his moods as if they were her own, a spike of irritation from the council chamber, a wave of dark satisfaction as he passed a sentence, a low thrumming possessiveness whenever he was near her. Her own senses were on fire. She could hear the skittering of a spider 100 yards away. She could smell the lie on a courtier before he even spoke, and she was strong. She had accidentally shattered a solid oak table when a serving girl had startled her. This new power was raw though and frightening. She was a queen, but she felt like a child playing with a blade. Tonight she was alone, pacing the cold marble floor of her chambers. Darius was in a closed council, dealing with the political fallout of his return. Elara was restless, the silence of the fortress pressing in on her. She walked onto the balcony, a terrifying precipice carved into the mountainside. The wind howled, whipping her hair around her face, but she didn't feel the cold. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps, but the sudden sharp pull of the bond, a silken rope tugging at her center. He was here. Darius stepped out onto the balcony, shrugging off his heavy fur-lined cloak. He had been in council for 6 hours, and he looked weary, the lines around his eyes deeper. You should be sleeping, he said. His voice was not an order, just a quiet statement. I can't, Elara admitted, turning to face him. It's all too loud. He nodded, understanding. He moved to stand beside her, his presence a shield against the roaring wind. The bond is settling. It is awakening your own bloodline. The Omegas of the Moonridge Pack were not always so subdued. Your ancestors were strong. I don't feel strong, she whispered, looking at her hands. I feel breakable. He was silent for a moment. Then he reached out, not with the possessive grip of the king, but with a gentleness that shocked her. He took her hand, his much larger, warmer one enveloping hers. You are not breakable, he said, his voice a low rumble. He lifted her hand, turning it over. You have iron in your veins, Elara. It has just been waiting for a fire to forge it. He traced the lines on her palm, the simple touch sending a jolt of liquid heat straight through her. His golden eyes met hers, and the weariness in them was replaced by that familiar dark fire. His gaze dropped to her mouth. You are not an Omega, he growled. You are not weak. You are mine. He tugged her hand, pulling her closer, and Elara's heart hammered, not with fear, but with a new wild anticipation. She was finally beginning to understand him. Cassandra stared at her reflection in the small cracked mirror. The Moonridge Alpha House was supposed to be a palace. It was a glorified log cabin. She was supposed to be a Luna adored and envied. Instead, she was a pariah. Her life was a nightmare. The pack, terrified of the Lycan King's wrath, treated her with cold, fearful disdain. They blamed her. They whispered that her ambition had brought disgrace to them all. Alpha Thorn, Marcus's father, had confined them both to the pack house, his face a constant mask of cold fury. And Marcus was the worst. He was a ghost. He barely spoke. He spent his days brooding, his eyes lost in the void, as he called it. He wouldn't touch her. He looked at her with a disgust that made her want to scream. This was not the future she had plotted for. This was not the power she had been promised. A message, a young pack warrior shouted from outside. A message from the Blackwood pack. Cassandra ran to the main hall. A traveling beta was handing a scroll to Alpha Thorn. "What is it?" she demanded. Thorn ignored her, breaking the wax seal. His eyes scanned the parchment. His face, already grim, turned ashen. He staggered back, dropping the scroll as if it had burned him. "What?" Cassandra snapped, snatching it from the floor. She read the words. It was a formal decree sent to all packs announcing the king's new mate, announcing the coronation. "And we celebrate the ascension of his fated, Elara of the Moonridge Pack, to her rightful place as Lycan Queen." Queen. The word was a physical blow. Not just a mate, not just a consort. Queen ruling over all packs. Ruling over her. Cassandra's vision went red. A choking, poisonous rage filled her throat. Elara, weak, pathetic, sniveling little Elara, who she had walked over her entire life, was now the most powerful female on the continent. She, Cassandra, was trapped in this wretched broken pack, tied to a useless broken alpha, while her sister was being crowned. "No," Cassandra whispered, her voice shaking with terrifying cold fury. "No, I will not allow it." Marcus, drawn by the commotion, entered the room. "What's wrong now, Cassandra?" he asked, his voice dead. Cassandra looked at him, her mind working. A new vicious and desperate plan forming. The king was powerful, yes, but he was also a male, and males, even kings, were fools. They were easily manipulated by whispers, by suggestions of betrayal. Marcus had been. Perhaps Darius could be too. "Nothing," Cassandra said, her voice suddenly sweet, a chilling contrast to the murder in her eyes. "Nothing at all, my love. I was just thinking. Elara was always so loyal to you." Marcus looked at her confused, but Cassandra just smiled, a slow, toxic expression. If she couldn't have the power, she would destroy the one who did. She would frame her sister. She would burn Elara's new world to the ground. The roaring wind of the balcony felt miles away, replaced by the heavy velvet silence of the king's chambers. Darius had not released her hand. He'd led her back inside to a sprawling map of the territories etched into a massive stone table. The room was lit only by the low blue flames of the hearth, casting their faces in stark shadow and light. The intimacy of the moment was a fragile, dangerous thing, more potent than any public display of power. "The court saw your strength tonight," Darius said, his voice a low rumble. He finally released her hand, tapping a finger on the map over the lands bordering the Moonridge territory. "When you stopped me from killing that fool." I didn't mean to undermine you," Elara said quickly, her old Omega instincts flaring up. "You didn't," he cut her off, his golden eyes intense. "You showed mercy, something this court has not seen in centuries." "They are afraid of me," he stated, a simple fact. "But that is a blunt tool. What you did, that inspires loyalty. It is a tool of a queen." He paused, his gaze hardening. "But it is also a vulnerability." Elara frowned. "What do you mean?" "This court," he swept his hand across the room, "is a nest of vipers, Elara. They have served me for centuries out of fear. Now you are here, my fated, my queen. You have a power they cannot understand, and they will test it. They will see your mercy as weakness. They will see your kindness as a flaw to be exploited." He moved closer, his sheer size seeming to absorb the firelight. "Your greatest test will not come from an enemy who shouts at the gates. It will come from a whisper in the halls. It will come from someone who smiles at you, someone who offers you comfort, someone who claims to be your friend." A cold premonition slid down her spine. "You're trying to scare me." "I am trying to prepare you," he corrected, his voice harsh. "You are no longer a pack Omega. You cannot afford to trust blindly. Especially," he added, his voice dropping, "with those from your past." Envy is a poison. Your sister holds a full cup. The sudden mention of Cassandra made Elara flinch. Before she could process his warning, he cupped her chin, his thumb brushing her bottom lip. The analytical cold king was gone, replaced by the raw possessive mate. I will not let them harm you, he growled. But you must learn to see the daggers before they are at your throat. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and the world narrowed to the space between them. The political lesson was over. He lowered his head and Elara's breath hitched, her eyes fluttering shut. She felt the brush of his lips, a promise of fire, a confirmation of their bond that she was, for the first time, ready to accept. But before their lips could truly meet, a sharp, urgent knock echoed through the chamber door. Darius's head snapped up, a low, frustrated growl rumbling in his chest. Enter, he commanded. Lord Kaelan swept into the room, his face a mask of grim urgency. He bowed low. Your Majesty, your pardon. An urgent message has arrived from the Moonridge Pack. It concerns the Queen. Cassandra had penned the letter herself, her hand steady, her mind sharp and clear for the first time in weeks. She had not written it as herself. She had crafted it as a loyal, terrified Moonridge warrior, one who had witnessed a terrible truth. She had filled it with the language of devotion, of fear for the king, of a terrible burden of conscience. She'd written that Elara was a spy, that her rejection by Marcus was a long-concocted plan to infiltrate the Lycan court, that Elara was still loyal to her true mate, Marcus, and that they met in secret. She wrote that Elara's new power was not from the king's bond, but from dark magic, and that she was plotting to find a way to sever the bond and assassinate the king, placing her real mate, Marcus, on the throne. It was a masterpiece of paranoia. She had given it to a beta traveler along with her last remaining silver jewelry to ensure its swift and anonymous delivery. And now she waited. The trap was set. In the Lycan court, Lord Kaelan held the cheap parchment as if it were a venomous snake. He stood before his king, who had moved to stand in front of Elara, a protective, immovable wall of fury. It arrived with the trade caravan, Majesty, Kaelan said, his voice tight. Delivered by a human runner. Anonymously. Read it, Darius commanded, his voice lethally calm. Elara gripped her hands together, the king's warning about whispers echoing in her ears. Kaelan's eyes scanned the page, his aristocratic features tightening with disgust. She is not what she seems, your Majesty. The rejection was a lie, a performance to gain your sympathy. Her bond to Alpha Marcus is not broken. They plot against you. She is a serpent. She will be your end. Kaelan stopped, unable to continue. The silence in the chamber was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. It was so utterly, poisonously Cassandra. It was the exact same tactic, a public lie to isolate her, to make her seem treacherous, and it had worked on Marcus. Her new fragile confidence began to crumble. Darius, she whispered, her voice shaking. Darius did not look at her. He held his hand out to Kaelan. Give it to me. He took the parchment, his golden eyes scanned the words, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He read it once, then a second time. Elara's heart hammered so hard she thought it would break her ribs. This was the test. This was the dagger he had warned her about. She could feel the weight of his suspicion, his doubt, a cold pressure against their bond. He had called her merciful. He had called her strong. But he was also a king, an ancient, ruthless ruler who had been warned of vipers, and a perfectly crafted lie had just been dropped into his nest. He slowly refolded the parchment, his movements deliberate. He turned, his golden eyes finding hers. They were not warm. They were not the eyes of her mate. They were the cold, assessing ancient eyes of the Lycan king. He believes it, she thought. A cold, sickening wave of despair washing over her. Just like Marcus, he believes it. The king's silence was a living, breathing monster in the room. Elara's legs felt weak. She had been ripped from her home, thrust into a world of predators, and the one person who was her anchor, her protector, now looked at her as if she were a stranger, as if she were the lie Cassandra had painted. Darius, she tried again, her voice stronger, desperate. You know me. You feel the bond. You know that isn't true. What I know, Darius said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, is that you were for 18 years loyal to another male. A male you believed was your destiny. He turned from her, pacing toward the hearth. What I know is that your sister is consumed by an envy that would burn the world to ash. She is capable of this lie. Then you believe me, Elara cried, a surge of relief making her dizzy. But I also know, he continued, turning back, his face a mask of cold calculation, that a lie is only dangerous if it is allowed to fester. He held up the parchment. This traitor's whisper is not just for me. It was delivered to Kaelin. By now the entire court is aware of its contents. Elara's stomach dropped. She understood. The whisper she'd heard when she first arrived, Omega weak wolf, would now be replaced by a new one. Traitor. They are already suspicious of you, Darius stated, confirming her fear. You are an outsider, a wolf, an Omega who became a queen. They want to believe this. They want you to be a usurper. It would make their world make sense again. So what do we do? Elara asked, her newfound regal bearing crumbling. She felt like the 18-year-old Omega again, trapped and powerless. How do I fight this? You can't just execute accusations. No, Darius agreed, his eyes unreadable. I cannot. He looked past her at Lord Kaelin, who was watching his king with hawk-like intensity, waiting for a command. The accusation has been made public. Therefore, the proof of its falsehood must also be public. A new cold dread settled over Elara. This was not a private matter between mates. This was a political trial. They believe you are a spy for the Moonridge Pack, Darius said, his voice devoid of emotion. They believe your heart belongs to your former mate. They believe your sister is your accomplice. She's no accomplice, Elara burst out. She's the one who wrote this. Perhaps, Darius said. And perhaps you are a brilliant liar. I cannot simply tell the court you are innocent. I must show them. We must have a trial. Elara stared at him, her mind racing. A trial? Here in this court of vipers who already hated her. Then I will testify, she said, lifting her chin. I will tell them the truth. No, Darius said, his word final. You will not. They will. A slow, cold understanding dawned on Elara. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Darius, what are you going to do? He looked at her, his golden eyes burning with the cold fire of a king passing judgment. I am going to bring the entire disease here and cut it out at the root. Kaelin. Majesty. Send a royal summons to the Moonridge Pack. Alpha Thorn, his son Marcus, and the Lady Cassandra. They are to present themselves to my court within 3 days for the public trial of their queen. The decree went out like a thunderclap. It was not a request. It was a royal summons carried by the king's own imperial guard. Their black and gold armor a terrifying sight in the struggling Moonridge territory. The news spread through the Lycan court like wildfire. The king in his cold wisdom was not murdering his new mate in the shadows. He was putting her and her accusers on public trial. Elara was a prisoner in her own opulent chambers. Darius had not visited her since the decree. He was, as Kaelin had politely informed her, making preparations. She was isolated, left alone with the whispers of the court and the cold, sick dread in her stomach. She tried to feel him through the bond, but he was shielded. His presence a distant cold star. He was not her mate right now. He was the king. He was her judge. Her newfound confidence was gone, replaced by the ghost of the Omega she had been. Marcus had believed Cassandra's lies with no evidence. Darius, her powerful ancient mate, was now demanding a public trial. Was he just a more calculating version of Marcus? Was he too just looking for a reason to discard her, an unsuitable Omega? The doubt was a poison, weakening her, making her question the very reality of the king's bond. On the 3rd day, she was dressed by silent serving women in a gown of deep midnight blue velvet. It was heavy and regal, but it felt like a shroud. Lord Kaelin appeared at her door, his face impassive. The king is seated, Your Majesty. Your pack has arrived. He led her through the echoing silent halls. The court was not in the great hall, but in the amphitheater of judgment, a vast open-air arena carved into the stone, reserved for high treason. The entire Lycan nobility was present, thousands of them, their cold, assessing eyes fixed on her as she walked to the center. Darius was there, seated on a massive throne of black granite. He was not her Darius. He was the Lycan king, a figure of terrible ancient majesty, his face a mask of cold iron. He did not look at her. And then she saw them. To the side, looking small and pathetic under the weight of the court's power, stood what was left of her past. Alpha Thorn, his face gray and haggard. Marcus, who looked like a walking corpse, his eyes hollow, the void in his soul visible to all. And Cassandra. She was dressed in her finest, a defiant, if slightly tattered, green dress. When she saw Elara, she didn't look afraid. She didn't look cowed. A slow, venomous, and utterly triumphant smirk spread across her face. She truly believed she had done it. She believed she had trapped the king and queen and that she was about to be vindicated. The trial begins, Darius's voice boomed, striking the stone and echoing across the arena. His golden eyes as cold and distant as the moon finally settled on her. Queen Elara stands accused of treason, of conspiring with her former pack to assassinate the king. We will hear the evidence. Bring forth the accuser. There is a complication, Your Majesty, Kaelin said, his voice low, just as the trial was to begin. He leaned toward the throne. The anonymous letter stated the treasonous meetings took place on Moonridge land. The accusers, the accused, they claim the only fair trial is one held on the land of the alleged crime. Elara's head snapped up. She saw Cassandra whisper frantically to Marcus, who then spoke to his father, who nodded. It was a ploy. They believe you will not leave your fortress, Kaelin murmured. They believe it is a way to stall, to claim an unfair trial. A dangerous glacial silence fell. Darius's eyes narrowed, fixed on the small, defiant cluster of Moonridge wolves. Cassandra was still smirking. She thought she had found a loophole. They are mistaken, Darius said, his voice a low, deadly promise. He rose from his throne, a towering, terrifying figure. The entire amphitheater gasped. The trial will not be held here. He pointed a single black-gloved finger at the Moonridge delegation. This began in their clearing. It will end in their clearing. We ride for the Moonridge Pack now. The journey was a tense, agonizing blur. Elara rode beside the king, but they were surrounded by his imperial guard. They were not mates. They were a judge and his prisoner. The Moonridge trio was transported under heavy guard. Their faces a mixture of confusion and, in Cassandra's case, growing confidence. She believed the king's dramatic move was a sign of his uncertainty, a way to appease the other packs by showing fairness. When they burst through the shadowfold into the sacred grove, Elara's breath caught in her throat. It was exactly as she'd left it, but it felt smaller. The entire Moonridge pack was already assembled, forced there by the king's advanced guard. They were kneeling, their faces pressed to the dirt, trembling in terror. This was the same ground, the same moon, now a pale crescent in the sky. The same audience, but she was different. Darius dismounted, his black cloak sweeping behind him. He didn't take the Alpha's platform. He strode to the exact center of the clearing, the same spot where Marcus had rejected her, the same spot where Darius had claimed her. The ground there seemed to hum, permanently saturated with their combined power. Here, he boomed, his voice rolling over the terrified pack, we will have the truth. He turned to the guard, his voice like cracking ice. Bring the accuser and bring the accused. Elara was led forward, her heart hammering. She stood on one side of the king. On the other, Cassandra was shoved forward by a guard. She stumbled but caught herself, her eyes blazing with righteous false fury. I am no accuser, she cried, playing her part. I am a victim. We all are. Of her. She pointed a trembling dramatic finger at Elara. She has bewitched him. She is a traitor. Elara met her sister's gaze. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold building rage. This would not be a repeat. And where, Darius said, his voice deceptively calm, is your proof? It is in the letter, Cassandra stammered, her plan not accounting for this. The anonymous letter? Darius asked, a dangerous silken tone to his voice. The one you wrote? Cassandra's face went white. What? No, I would never. Then the king said, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across his face, you will not mind that I have brought another witness. He turned his gaze to the edge of the clearing. The beta traveler you paid with your mother's silver. Bring him forward. Two of the king's imperial guard marched the beta traveler into the center of the clearing. He was a thin, nervous-looking wolf, his eyes wide with terror as he found himself the center of attention. Cassandra's face went white. She shot a panicked look at Marcus, but he was staring at the ground, lost in his own void, oblivious. I don't know who that is, Cassandra shrieked, her voice cracking. This is a trick, a new lie. She has bewitched him just as she bewitched you, your majesty. She turned to Darius, her hands clasped in a desperate false plea. My king, you are a just ruler. You must see the truth. I saw it. I saw them meeting in secret near the old river. Marcus was torn. He still felt the pull of their old bond. And she used it. She promised him power. She promised him your throne. Elara stood silent, her face pale but her expression cold. She watched her sister weave her tapestry of lies, each word more desperate than the last. Cassandra's performance was masterful. She wept. She accused. She pleaded. She painted a vivid picture of a treacherous Omega, still hopelessly in love with her first mate, manipulating a grieving alpha and a new trusting king. The Moonridge Pack was mesmerized. The whispers started again. It did make a sick kind of sense. Why else would the king take her? She must have enchanted him. Cassandra, sensing she was winning them over, grew bolder. She is a spy, she screamed, pointing a trembling accusatory finger at Elara. She is a traitor to her own pack and a serpent in your bed. I tried to warn you. This anonymous letter, it was the only way. I was afraid for my life. Afraid of her. She finished, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She looked like a tragic heroine. She had played her final desperate card. The clearing was silent, the tension so thick it was a physical weight. Every eye, Lycan and Wolf, turned to the king, waiting for his judgment. Darius remained still for a long, agonizing moment, his face a mask of stone. He let the accusation hang in the air, letting its poison spread. Elara's heart hammered, a cold dread creeping into her. He had to believe her. Finally, the king turned his cold golden eyes, not to Cassandra, not to the beta, but to Elara. You have heard the accusation. His voice boomed, devoid of all warmth. What say you, Queen Elara? Elara looked at her sister, at the pack that had scorned her, and at the man she once loved. Then she looked at her king. She stepped forward, her regal blue gown sweeping the dirt. Her voice when she spoke was not the whisper of an Omega. It was the clear, cold, and resonant voice of a queen. I say she lies. Cassandra let out a sharp, theatrical scoff. Of course you deny it. Where is your proof, sister? I do not need to provide it, Elara said, her gaze steady. She is correct, Darius's voice cut through the air. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on a now faltering Cassandra. As you already have. He turned to the trembling beta traveler. Tell this assembly what you told my guard when they found you on the road. Tell them who gave you the letter. The beta, trapped in the king's golden gaze, fell to his knees. It was her, he stammered, pointing a shaky finger at Cassandra. The lady Cassandra. She gave me a silver necklace, said it was her mother's, and a bag of coin. She told me to get the letter to the Lycan court, to make sure I said it was from a loyal warrior. Cassandra reeled back as if struck. He's lying. He's with her. It's a conspiracy. She got to him. Silence, Darius roared. The force of his command was a physical blow, knocking Cassandra off her feet and onto the hard-packed earth. You accuse your queen of meeting her former mate in secret by the old river, Darius said, his voice deadly calm. A bold claim, one that would require witnesses. I am the witness, Cassandra cried from the ground. Are you? Darius asked, a slow predatory smile touching his lips. He was enjoying this. Because it is a fascinating accusation, especially since for the entire time since my queen and I left this territory, your chosen mate, Alpha Marcus, has been under the constant invisible surveillance of my imperial guard. Peter's hollow eyes snapped up. Alpha Thorn gasped, his face turning ashen. He has not left the pack house in 3 weeks, Darius continued, his voice a casual deadly purr. He has not spoken to anyone in secret. He has spent his days, and I quote from my guard's report, languishing in a state of profound and pathetic self-pity. He has not met with anyone, especially not my queen. The truth landed with the force of a guillotine. The entire pack stared. Cassandra's plot wasn't just a lie. It was an impossible lie. Darius turned to Elara, and for the first time in days, the cold judicial mask fell. His golden eyes were blazing with fierce possessive pride. He had not believed the lie for a second. He had simply built the stage to watch his enemy destroy herself. Cassandra began to sob, a dry, broken animal sound. No, it was supposed to work. It worked on Marcus. It was supposed to work on you. She had just confessed. The clearing stared horrified as she confirmed her own treason. The trap had never been for Elara. It was for Cassandra, and she had walked right into it. It worked on Marcus. The words echoed in the dead, horrified silence, louder than any roar. Marcus stared at Cassandra, at the pathetic weeping creature on the ground. It was true. All of it. He hadn't just been a fool. He had been a tool. A weak, arrogant, and easily manipulated pawn in her desperate, jealous game. The rejection, the humiliation of his fated, the loss of his own soul, it had all been for this. The cold, dead void in his chest flashed hot, not with anger, but with a searing, bottomless self-disgust. He had been weak. He had allowed this poison to convince him that his own destiny was unsuitable. Marcus, Cassandra whispered, her voice broken. She began to crawl toward him, her hands outstretched like a beggar. Marcus, please tell them you love me, not her. Tell them you chose me. Please. He recoiled from her touch as if she were diseased. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the beautiful, popular woman he had chosen was gone. In her place was a sniveling, treacherous stranger, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with a madness he now found repulsive. His voice when he spoke was dead. You, he said, the word dripping with venom that shocked even him, are a plague. Cassandra froze, her hand hovering in the air. You used me, he continued, his voice rising, gaining a bitter, broken strength. You poisoned me against my fated. You helped me destroy my own soul for this. To be Luna of a broken pack. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to destroy her again. He looked past Cassandra, his gaze landing on Elara. She was standing beside the king, bathed in new cold power, her sapphire and gold eyes watching him with a pity that was worse than any hatred. He saw in that instant everything he had thrown away. He saw the strength he had called weakness. He saw the honor he had called unsuitable. He saw the queen he had rejected. He took a public, deliberate step back from Cassandra, severing the last invisible thread between them. I want nothing to do with you, he spat. You are no Luna of mine. You are nothing to this pack. You are nothing to me. It was a final public rejection, an echo of the one that had started it all. Cassandra let out a choked sound as her last hope crumbled. Marcus didn't care. He turned his full attention to Elara. He did the only thing left for him to do. He dropped to his knees, bowing his head in the dirt before the woman he had cast aside. My queen, he choked out, the words tearing his throat raw. I was a fool. I was blind, arrogant. I rejected my destiny. I am sorry. I will live with that forever. All eyes were on Elara. Her pack, her king, her broken former mate, and her hysterical defeated sister. They all waited for her judgment. Cassandra, seeing Marcus's final betrayal, let out a wail of complete and utter despair. She was alone. She scrambled across the dirt, her nails digging into the ground, a desperate animal. She grabbed the hem of Elara's midnight blue gown, her grip frantic. Elara, Cassie, please, she sobbed, her beautiful face a grotesque mask of snot and tears. Please, you're my sister. You have to forgive me. I didn't know. I was jealous. I was just so jealous. Please. The proud, popular Cassandra, who had smirked over Marcus's shoulder, was now a groveling, broken creature at her feet. The entire Moonridge Pack watched, witnessing the final absolute reversal of power. Elara looked down at her sister. She felt the cold wind of the clearing, the same wind that had chilled her on the night of her rejection. She remembered the physical, soul-splitting pain. She looked at Cassandra's clawing, desperate hands on her dress. Then she looked at Darius. He was watching her, his golden eyes intense, his expression unreadable. He was not interfering. This was her justice to pass. Slowly, deliberately, Elara reached down. Cassandra's eyes lit with wild, desperate hope. But Elara didn't take her hand. She simply unhooked Cassandra's fingers from the velvet one by one and took a single step back, breaking the contact. No, Elara said. Her voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was quiet, cold, and final, carrying the ancient authority of the Lycan lineage. You are not my sister, she said, her voice clear in the silence. "You are a lesson." She turned from Cassandra's crumpled form. She looked at Marcus still kneeling, his head bowed in shame. He was a ghost, a living monument to his own arrogance. He would be alpha of this disgraced pack, forever bound to his mistake, forever living in the void he had created. That was a sentence more profound than any she could pass. She had faced her tormentors. She had seen their lies exposed. She had watched them break each other, and she was finally free. Elara turned her back on her sister's broken sobs and her former mate's hollow regret. She turned her back on the Moonridge Pack and the small sad life she had once been forced to live. She walked across the clearing, her steps steady, her head held high. She stopped in front of Darius, the King of Kings, her mate. He held out his hand. She took it, their fingers lacing together, and the power of their bond flared to life. A visible golden aura that shimmered around them both, a silent promise of a new future. He looked down at her, and his harsh, kingly features softened into a look of fierce, possessive, and absolute pride. "My queen," he murmured loud enough for all to hear. He pulled her to his side and together they turned to face the stunned, silent clearing. Elara, the rejected Omega, was gone. In her place stood Elara, the Lycan queen, her spirit forged in betrayal, her power awakened by destiny, and her future secured at the side of her king. The bond between them burned bright as the moon above, a testament that the moon goddess's gifts, no matter how cruelly rejected, would always find their way to those truly worthy of them. And as they walked from that clearing for the final time, leaving behind the ashes of her old life, Elara knew with absolute certainty that she had never been weak. She had been waiting for the one strong enough to see her true worth. If you enjoyed this story of rejection, redemption, and royal destiny, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling werewolf romance tales. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought of Elara's transformation from rejected Omega to Lycan Queen. Should Cassandra and Marcus face further consequences? Let us know your thoughts and we'll see you in the next story.